Hi, welcome to the Wide Open Road Art Roving Conversation series. Today's conversation is with Hermione Merry. Hermione has a background in film and theatre that strongly influences the aesthetics of her installation and video-based art practice. Using a filmic sense of a loaded moment, Hermione alludes to the unknown as she addresses the mysteries of identity, space, place, and emotion. This is Hermione, who has hasn't shown at Wide Open Road, but we've worked with Hermione on a few projects. Post-Truth Booth in Melbourne most recently. Yes. So we just wanted to start off by asking you if you could just sort of tell us about your practice, like how it all started, really, just how it started.
Okay, sure. Well, I'm a video installation artist, and my path wasn't really the traditional one. I did creative arts and did a lot of theatre and filmmaking there, and I was sort of I was performing a lot, and theatre was my path for quite a while. And then I went to film school, and that sort of segued into the film and TV industry for me. So it was, which, whilst it's really influenced my practice, it also really kind of divided me creatively, because I was constantly trying to fit my slightly wild creative ideas into a conventional narrative format that was needed for storytelling particularly in the Australian film industry. I found it really hard, and then so I went on, and I was working in art department quite a lot for a long time. Then I had kids, and made the choice to not work in the film industry anymore, because the hours were just so long, and I couldn't commit in the way that I would have liked to have been able to if I didn't have the responsibility of kids. So for me, it just felt like a good decision to sort of leave that. But then I was really creatively frustrated, so I still needed a creative outlet, and I just started making work at home by myself initially. And I had a small show at a little artist run space by myself, and that sort of kick-started a new way of thinking about my practice, that I really enjoyed that I can do this on my own, in my own space, in my own time, while my kids are asleep.
That's great you managed to do that, because it can be really hard to just get your head, I think, into that like art making space when you're parenting.
I think that's true. It just felt like it was bubbling up, and I didn't have a choice. It had to start coming out. But what I really realised is what was missing for me is I'm a collaborator, and suddenly this practice wasn't collaborative, and I'd come from theatre and film, which was only collaborative for me in the ways that I worked, and I was finding my ideas were suffering without a sort of creative dialogue, a constant creative dialogue. And so I sought out a couple of people who were friends through theatre and through film previously, and Nicholas Verso, who's a filmmaker, he and I have made some work together, and will probably still in the future make work again, and it was really sort of exciting discovering our creative dynamic and what, the possibilities that came when we put ourselves together and stepped outside the more constricting kind of roles of directing films, or that we'd previously inhabited. And then I also began to work with a friend of mine who I met through theatre as a performer, Henriette Schuster, and we started making work together, and that was a collaboration that really took off, and we had have a real synergy. And I think I tend to be the one that, I have a lot of the kind of big grand ideas, and Henry has a lot of the grace and restraint and kind of academic sensibility to rein things in and to help kind of almost like a dramaturgical kind of, I just kind of throw it and then she helps shape it. And it's really exciting. And also she will often, we sometimes both perform in the work, but I think I'm less confident as a performer and I'm more confident behind the camera. So often it will be Henry who performs in the work, but we've made a lot of work about our, I suppose, about the nature of our collaboration and identity, and that what happens, when you collaborate creatively.
So you've made works that are about collaboration? Yes. That's because we did a long piece about a piece that we developed for a long time about that too, with a bunch of people. There was how many of us in it? 6?
Yeah, 5.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's still sort of one of my favourite works of it. There was one work that it really culminated with, where we did a lot. It was called the White Hotel, and it was sort of like a spatial art adaptation of a book by D.M. Thomas, which is this quite very surreal telling of, or sort of imagined telling of, is it Anna B. Freud's hysteria patient. And it's an incredible book, and it's it's very sexual and it's very violent and it's very interesting and very full of really strong imagery. And so we sort of used that as a starting point, and we were looking at the idea of the unconscious and the shared unconscious, and we were trying to do things like try and be hypnotized together at the same time and video our faces but we couldn't find a hypnotist to hypnotize us together. It was
really?
So we went to a few different people, and it was complex.
Sorry, you go.
That's okay, but the work resulted in us, we read passages, we did, so we were also looking at different types of mediation, like technological mediation of ideas, so that sort of taking the kind of raw creative idea and augmenting it, through technology. So we did this thing where we read passages random, open up the book and read random passages of the text to this program on the computer, and then the computer would record it and then speak it back. And then so we had these sort of random bits of text being spoken back to us by this computerized female voice, and we listened to that while we were had ourselves being videoed simultaneously, a close up of our head, our faces upside down. We were hanging upside down, sort of echoing that image that sort of quite famous. I don't know if it's Man Ray or not now. I'm not going to be able to quote properly. The woman with the long hair, falling,
cascading down.
Yes.
That photograph.
Yeah, I think that is Man Ray.
I think it is.
Yeah.
I hope so. Anyway, and it was sort of an extreme close up of our faces as we listened to this. And then what we did was, in the editing process, we superimposed our faces over each other, and then had this really weird experience of our faces fitting perfectly, over our features.
Really?
Yes, when we don't look anything really alike in real life, but they fit perfectly, and sort of created this new human, this new woman, and then it was sort of presented in a spatial way, where we were projecting on. We sort of had a big steel and perspex kind of prism thing in the middle of the room, and that we projected onto an etched perspex, so we could project onto the perspex, and then clear perspex that went through, and we had the prism would fill with smoke, and so the projection would fall on the smoke, and the smoke would kind of be released and then dissipate again. It was a fun.
So up our alley as well.
Yeah, I know. This is exactly. We've talked about projecting in the smoke and stuff too. So where did you end up performing this?
We it was as part of the Linden Innovators program in probably, I think it was like 2013 maybe, so a while ago.
Yeah,
but
not that long ago.
Yeah.
In the scheme of things.
Yeah, I suppose.
And then you were a mum, you be doing all that.
As soon as you throw parenthood in.
Yeah, that's right. So that was with one child. We were very productive when we both had one child.
Yeah.
And then we went on to both have a second child, and that
slowed down.
Yeah, certainly slowed down our practice quite a bit. And then then me having a third child and moving here and stuff.
The final spanner.
It's certainly with obstacles. But
at that point, how were you getting by as a person, say with one child, by the sounds of it? Like, how did you fund the work? How did you how were you sustaining your lifestyle?
Well, because we'd sort of come to our art practice, I feel, much later in life, so we hadn't gone the traditional route of going through art school and developing those connections then, and we were in our kind of early 30s and having our first shows, so it was tricky, and with families to support as well. Henry was working a lot at Melbourne Festival, and I was working for Acme, so financially I supported myself through the work at Acme.
You were based in Melbourne at
that time, but also we were both wanting to be quite strategic about choices we made, because we felt like we had less time than a lot of people, and so we really we'd love to get to a point where we are funded to make some work, and
that happened.
And that happened, which was really exciting. So we did get to the point where we were funded. We got some Australia Council Emerging Artist funding to make our last major work that we did, which was really good and so affirming. But then I think it's been hard for us since then, because we both moved regionally. We both moved up here.
Lucky you moved to the same place.
Yeah, that's right.
Road. Oh, you're on the same road, are you?
Yes.
Didn't know that.
And sort of with building houses and parenting, for me, child number 3 came along. So we have done, our output has been less, but we've done a couple of good things. We did night art in Melbourne a year ago now, and that was a exciting work, and that was very performative. It was an exciting work in that we really pushed ourselves creatively and took a lot of big risks with it, because we thought, well, it's one night only.
What were some of the risks?
Tell us about the work.
Well, I think it was sort of an extension of, so Nikki Lamb, who was curating the work, she saw a work of ours, Stern and Guka, which was at Anapapas Gallery in maybe 2014, and that was a video installation there, and she said, I really love this work. I would love it if you could extend the work for night art. And it was actually really good for us, because the original incarnation of that work we were both a little bit unhappy with. It wasn't sitting sitting well with us, so we thought, and there was, I think, a lot, when you create, sometimes you feel like the work really intimately, and then other times when you create, you feel like the work actually has the upper hand, and you're sort of like, I don't quite know what we're doing, but the work is somehow really wielding this like strong thing, and you're going, I'm not sure.
And I find it really hard to discuss the work at that point.
Yes,
it's really hard, because you just don't
actually know what it is.
That's right.
Yeah,
and you're not sure what to measure it against or with, or within your own sort of frame of references. And it was really like that. And actually, the work continued being like that. And so we were in this amazing, it was site specific, and we were in this amazing space in Chapter House in Melbourne, in Flinders Lane, and so we had quite a large projection of, it was again no, it was projected onto the wall of the sort of chapel house, or whatever. I can't quite remember the specifics of the space, of what the space was originally intended to be, but it was a large we'd shot the irises of our eyes in extreme close up, and then again overlaid each other's eyes, and then we then had an image in the pupil. We're through post-production, we put inside the pupil an image of it was Henry, but unrecognisable figure in this kind of unusual sort of medieval style robe on a sports oval in the middle of the night, doing this strange kind of gestural, ritualistic stuff, and that was reflected in the pupil. So that was the projection component. But then we had Henry was performing live in the space, and she was still in that same robe, except there are a few different. So we often work with being quite self-reflexive about often the mechanics of filmmaking or theatrical spectacle. So just things like using film lights in shot and that sort of stuff as
exposing
the mechanics and using that as part of the style of the work. And so there was very much that. It was very much sort of a deliberately lit space, and Henry was a performer who was her role was performing sort of a Sisyphean task of moving this enormous pile of sand from one part of the room to where the light is falling in another part of the room with her hands, and then she would move the light again and then have to shift it to another. So it's sort of strange kind of internal rules of that kind of creative world. And then meanwhile in the background there was this sort of large we called it a blobby mess. It was like this large sort of sculptural piece made out of insulation kind of expander foam.
It's amazing stuff. Yeah.
It is. And that was sort of like that was for us representing the unknown of the work, like what the things that we couldn't explain out of the work, and it was always sort of sitting there in the background.
Yes. Yeah.
Hey.
I'm saying that's the punctum, which is it?
Well,
not so much.
Well, the punctum is the bit that you can't yeah, sort of. The punctum is the bit that like intrudes upon, it's Roland Barthes, that sort of like intrudes upon it, and then upon the, so you look at the work and then there's something in it that you can't pin down, and through that you kind of direct it into a new space, which he would argue is like a sort of experiential space as opposed to
that's very interesting. That sounds so apt for this particular work as well. And Henry also had, we also had over her medieval robe, she was wearing under her, she was wearing safety glasses, but also like a safety, like fluoro safety vest over her medieval robe, and had kind of safety lines and bollards sort of sectioning off the space in which she was working. And so, we were also kind of talking about the art and the nature of risk and sort of creative risk and that containment of your ideas or your creativity that you naturally kind of impose on things. But it was a fun work. It was really exciting because so many people came. Like being part of something like night art is so different to having work in a gallery, because it has, I suppose, a festival type feel to it. People are really coming deliberately to see a lot of work, and we were astounded. We really didn't think that many people would come through, but there was hundreds of people coming through.
That's wonderful. Yeah,
it was great.
So with the work that you make, it sounds like there's definitely sort of a politics behind it. What would you say about that?
See, this is where I need Henry here.
Well, all I mean is like for you, like why?
How
why do you make?
center is it? or is it at the background? Is it there at all?
My work?
Yeah,
or
the
politics.
How does it enter into things for you, or is it more like Henrietta with her sort of academic, intellectual?
I think, I feel like a kind of conscious politics is... The politics certainly don't come before the creative for me. I have it's very ideas driven, or I find it's quite unashamedly kind of self-expressive in it, it is that this kind of creative drive within me that I want to... It's and it's what always drew me to theatre, and then particularly to film, is I wanted to create these moments of feeling
exactly what I wanted to, You guys should work together. You're like singing her song, right?
Really? Yeah. Well, I think the four of us should probably work together.
Yes, please.
But that's why film was so was limiting for me, because I needed a narrative, whereas actually what I wanted was the moment without the narrative, and I wanted the moment to be suggestive of kind of multiple narratives. But it's sort of like if you take your favorite moment in a film and just take say 30 seconds out of a film and it's like that
it's the micro instance.
Sorry
to jump in, because this is the theme for it. We're all about the micro instance.
Okay.
And when you extract that moment, it becomes a whole thing.
It's like this exploded moment,
and it expands, and the possibilities become endless, and you can break and I remember when I was doing my interview to get into film school and stuff, they asked me, why I wanted to make films, and I said because I want to create a moment like the moment in Twin Peaks where Leland Palmer finds out that Sarah Palmer finds out that Laura is possibly dead. Well, there's and Leland Palmer's been on the phone, and the phone drops, and
that moment,
and there's her screams coming out of the phone in the hotel, and it's just all the things contained around that. And I said, if I could create a moment like that, which I'm sure I haven't yet, but it's just that moment.
Too,
that's right.
That's your reason to keep going.
That's right. But and I think sometimes our work is criticised for being maybe overly sentimental or overly theatrical, and I tend to be a little bit unashamedly proud of that, actually, because that's what we come from. We come from theatre and we come from film, where it is all about the kind of creation and manufacture of emotional moments, whether it's with bigger liveness, making bigger the feeling and. Yeah.
Oh, that
sounds so great.
So, what do you think is the role of the work, in the world? When it goes out, what are you hoping that it will do?
That's a good question. I like to hope that on some level our work might just destabilize people who experience it just a little bit, or that it's something that interrupts their natural flow, and maybe if we're lucky kind of seeps in like some sort of sediment into the back of their mind that they can replay later in a sort of emotive kind of way, and that maybe through that it you might hope that it helps. It's also to do with the it's really to, and certainly with Henry and I, it's to do with the unknown. It's trying to grapple with and make sense of things in life that we don't understand, and that's really the underpinning of kind of most of our work, is this kind of trying to hold or explore what's unknown. And
because this is just so interesting to me, and where do you think that unknown? Do you think that unknown is experienced differently now to say 10 years ago? Like, do you think that new technology and all that stuff, do you think that's had an impact on people's experience of the unknown?
Yes, but I think the unknown it changes. So it's not one thing. So what was the unknown in one? And this is actually a lot that came into our night art work with, you know, sort of drawing on this history, like it's this sort of grappling with, you know, and because the work was originally called a Sternengucker, which in German, Henry's German, is stargazer, and it was about this sort of experience of like, you know, thinking about when people didn't know what was in space and would lie back and with their eyes look up at the stars, and this, and so it's the idea of the, you know, then the person reflected in the pupil is kind of somehow trying to represent what's unknown about that experience, and then looking, say, in today's society and with things like the safety tape or the safety jacket and stuff, people I think are so possibly no more than once upon a time, but very careful about the unknown. It's the unknown is something to be kind of managed or feared or put up boundaries to keep out, or, you know, it's that element of risk and not being able to control something. But I think the unknown always stays the same, and it changes as we change, because it's only ever in relation to what we know or we are.
So you're not talking about the unknowable, you're talking about almost like a quest, do you think?
Maybe
to know, to
no, because I don't think you can ever know. Okay. Because the unknown is always going to be elusive. So even if you do quest and you, like with the stargazing, for example, and you find out, okay, well, you know, these are planets and stars, and that's right. That still doesn't change the sense that there is the unknown in the world.
Yeah.
You know, there is always going to, it will be there. So as soon as you have meaning, it doesn't matter, because it'll just turn into something else that you don't know.
So it's a human experience.
Maybe, yes.
Not knowing.
Yeah.
Do you think?
Which I think is you can't change, because the unknown actually isn't external anyway, it's internal, like personally.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well,
I don't know.
Profound.
I don't know. There we go.
Wow, good answer.
Just to tie it back down to something a bit more.
Yes.
Community.
Concrete. Oh, yes.
Yes.
Do you feel like you, like a community, an artist, community of artists is important to you?
Yes.
Sounds like it.
Most definitely. Yeah. And I think unless... Yeah, I need that fundamentally, unequivocally. Yeah. And as soon as, I mean, it's like, you know, whenever we've all had the space to kind of come together and speak about work, I then leave feeling sort of so excited and so kind of generated. And it's like, okay, well, somehow in our busy schedules, it would be great to try and come together, because I just think the power of community and collaboration is so huge.
Like you say, synergistic, like it's like it's greater than the sum of its parts. Like
absolutely,
always is what I've found.
And do you feel like moving here to Castlemaine, like what sort of an effect on your artist community has that had?
It's been interesting, because in Melbourne I felt very much I didn't, even though I was going to a lot of shows and seeing a lot of work, I didn't feel necessarily like, because I hadn't had the shared art school experience, that actually some of the, you know, the ideas that I was working with were quite different to the ideas that were sort of really on point or on trend coming out of art school. And I would see all the work, and I would, yes, be influenced by elements of it, but actually felt like I was quite on a, you know, just marching to the beat of a fairly different drum. And that was at once exciting and also really destabilizing, and would make me call into, well, you know, what am I, maybe I'm missing something, or, you know, so that's why I would still want to have a lot of conversations with, you know, sort of emerging artists in Melbourne and stuff, but at the same time, still really wanting to hold claim to what it was that I did, and that was really the friction between my stuff was so theatrical and emotional, and that was not what was happening in town. So then moving up here, I think it's been tricky because I haven't been able to see as much work as I might like to see, but thank God for the internet that at least, you know, gives you the opportunity to explore somewhat, you know, what else is happening in Melbourne and around the world and that sort of thing. But certainly moving up here, something that did happen is it's given me what I feel is like the space to dream and, you know, to really dream a new work up that isn't actually, because it's that space when you're creating, I think it's so kind of personal and so private and so vulnerable and fragile that sometimes in Melbourne I'd be, you know, having these ideas or this, you know, creative urge, and then I'd go and see other work or have a conversation, or, you know, there was so much kind of stimulation in the city that would sometimes then interrupt the flow, and maybe I'd stop working on that, or, you know, the critical voice inside my head would tell me it wasn't worth making or wasn't right. Whereas up here, I suppose I feel like Henry and I are in the process of dreaming up a new work that is it will be like a large undertaking when we do finally make it. But that's sort of in development at the moment, and I think that we've been able to do that because of having the sort of like the physical space, the physical removal from the really intense kind of stimulation of the city.
So that's what I just want to ask you about is, do you think it's about physical space? Do you think it's about being able to live cheaply? Do you think it's about, you know, the ease of being in a small town where you can get to the shops and, you know, it sounds like you're living close to town now and things like that. Like, what do you think the key factors would be? Say you had to tell someone what they should look for. Like, what do you think has made the most difference for you?
For me, it's been the physical space, I think.
Actual space.
Yeah, actual space. And it's a little bit like I always, it's like if you go into, say, Chapel Street Bazaar and you're trying to find something. It's like there is so much exciting stuff everywhere that it just changes your value system of what is good and what is bad, and it's totally overwhelming, and you usually come out with nothing, and it's a bit disappointing. But if you go to a country op shop of a town that you're just driving through, and there might be a whole lot of shit in there, but then there's one absolute gem, and that's the gem you take home. It's a little bit like that with ideas or something. For me anyway. But it's less to do with, I mean, my situation in terms of economic situation and working situation is sort of in flux at the moment, and has actually probably what it has been since moving up here. It was living conditions were much harder because I was living in a shed and building a house and having another baby, and
it's not straightforward,
and not working, and so all of the living and the economics and all that sort of stuff was really challenging. But now that I'm in town and in a house and stuff, I do feel like there is maybe a bit more security around those daily, sort of things that will hopefully give me space to
And it sounds like your practice is ongoing. It's like art's not something that you're moving away from necessarily.
No, it's definitely ongoing, but I have just sort of, because Henry and I really kind of went hard and fast for a little while, and I have sort of felt like I need to pull back from that level of output for a bit, just for the sake of my kids and stuff, and possibly next year I'm looking at going back to work and possibly teaching and doing CRT teaching, and I do feel like next year a lot will be focused on actually just making that work, because I need money. So and I mean, I do have a project that I'm doing, a collaborative project that I'm doing in Melbourne, as the video installation as part of something that will pay me.
Yeah.
And will pay for childcare.
Oh my gosh.
Hallelujah.
We've been wondering
I
about putting that
know.
on a budget.
Yeah.
We're
Yes.
always like, can we? I don't know.
You can. Well,
Yes.
yeah. My collaborator, he emailed me and he said, and by the way, childcare is factored into the
Right.
budget. And I was
Jeez.
like, oh my goodness, how wonderful.
Yeah.
So that I sort of see that as being my big project for sort of the next year that I'll be contributing to, and then in the background, Henry and I will be developing this new work, and then I'll be
Another busy year.
teaching and
Yeah, it sounds busy.
hopefully,
Sounds
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Well, we should probably wrap it up there.
Yes.
But thank you so much for
That's
talking to us.
okay.
That was really interesting.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for having
Yeah.
me.